Hello, I'm Dawn, owner of Hungry Heart Quests. Thank you all for tuning in today. I'm so excited to introduce my longtime friend and wild adventurer, Kristin Smith. Kristin is an author, an adventurer, and an expert in outdoor recreation, geology, and irregular warfare. Anything you'd like to add to your pedigree?
No, I think that sounds pretty good.
Yeah. So to start us off, I want to do a little bit of an icebreaker, and I would love to hear about some sort of misadventure that you experienced. So an expedition or experience that went hilariously wrong. And feel free to use your storytelling skills to bring it to life.
Yes, for ones that went hilariously wrong and not like, oh hey, wow, we almost died wrong. Um, Definitely was the first time I went winter camping, which was freshman year of college. We went up to Highlight Canyon, which is only about 20 minutes outside of Bozeman, so I really question why we didn't just go home. But we didn't. On the way up, somehow we stopped like once to move something around in the car, and somehow during that time, my sleeping bag was lost. So we got up to Highlight and we decided to go for it anyway. My friend's like, I have a really warm sleeping bag. You know, we have a little blanket we can put on the floor. It'll be fine. Yeah, it was not fine. It was very cold. So we sort of huddled under the one sleeping bag and yeah, we didn't know each other very well at that point, because this was near the beginning of freshman year, so someone I didn't know very well. It turns out later we discussed it. Neither of us are much for like a lot of physical contact, especially with people we don't know very well. But we had the sort of survival spoon a little bit for this particular trip, and did not get a lot of sleep still. And about five, well, I was already awake because I was cold, and so I was just sort of sitting there, almost shivering. And then I rolled over, and she was also awake, and she rolled over, and we made eye contact. And this is like 5 in the morning. And we both just started laughing hysterically and packing up the tents. And yeah, so I really have no clue why, when the sleeping bag was discovered to be missing, we did not decide to try again another weekend, but we didn't. And so now I have this story that I get to tell people about poor choices made while winter camping.
Yeah, and you probably learned from it.
Yes, bring a sleeping bag. Check with your tent mate before heading up. Their feelings on survival spooning with near strangers.
Yeah, that's that is excellent advice. And something to keep in mind for every scenario where that might be
Yeah,
the case.
just good life advice. If you're staying with anyone traveling anywhere, ask their feelings on survival spooning.
hmm hmm So, did you ever find the sleeping bag?
No, I had to buy a new one. I have no idea what happened to it.
I wonder if there was some like weird little trip of destiny that was like, we're gonna make Kristen really uncomfortable.
No, I think it probably fell out when we opened the back of the car, and I think some other college kid driving up Highlight was like, "Holy crap, a brand new sleeping bag.
hmm
This is
hmm
mine now."
Yeah, that's a bummer. But you made it through. You did not freeze to death.
Yes.
Are you still friends with that person? Like, have you had any
Yeah, the
contact with
friendship
them?
did survive the survival spooning.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. So, tell us a little bit about your background. For one, I know that you have a an extensive CV, I think, when it comes to like outdoors stuff. But maybe tell us about your kind of upbringing and your introduction to the outdoors and your more professional experience as well. However you want to tell that.
Yeah, so I grew up going outside. Our family trips were camping trips or skiing trips or biking trips. That was what you did for fun. And I really liked all of it. And probably in like middle school and high school, I started being more aware that that was a thing you could do as a job, and started looking more into mountain guiding and things like that. And by high school, I decided I really wanted to be a mountain guide. But there weren't really a lot of mountain guide positions available that didn't require a lot of experience. So I ended up working as a whitewater rafting guide first. And then through the experience I got from that, worked for the outdoor rec program at Montana State University, guiding trips, doing like hiking and snowshoeing, cross country skiing, and then being an assistant trip leader on climbing and ice climbing and things like that. And then during the summers, I also worked as a educator and deckhand on a sailing ship out in Puget Sound that does environmental education. And I was the medical officer there as well, because I got my wilderness first responder, which is required for pretty much all guide jobs. And then I've worked a little bit as a guide out here in Colorado. And I'm also working on becoming a trip leader for the Colorado Mountain Club. And I think that's about it.
Right on. Yeah, extensive CV. And there are, of course, for me, there are like geeky things that I'm always like, "Well, that's so cool." But it sounds like you've been doing it for a long time. You have a lot of experience leading people, and you seem to enjoy it and keep doing it. Which is great. A lot of people might have an experience, say they forget their sleeping bag and then have to cuddle up with a stranger. And then they're like, well, I'm never doing that again. So it's awesome that you are continuing to find more and more outdoor adventures that like light your fire, I guess.
Yeah, I guess there's always something new that I want to try. I guess last winter I took my Abby one, so now I can backcountry ski.
Yeah, which
So
is beyond my expertise, but that's awesome. And I'm
yeah,
excited
I
for you.
mainly wanted to find out where the avalanche terrain is so that I can never ever go in it. So I will be in the backcountry skiing very gentle slopes, both to avoid avalanches and because my backcountry skis are tilly skis and I am not very good at it.
Ah, right on. Well, I support you in avoiding avalanche areas because you are my friend and I prefer you alive. So,
I prefer me alive as well.
so I wanted to ask you a little bit about your experience guiding and what you have found to be something that has a lasting impact on people that go on these trips with you.
I think a lot. It depends a little bit on the trip. 'Cause like on the boat and some other things I've done, you were working more with youth, like middle school, high school, a little bit of college, and then in just like kind of regular mountain guiding, river guiding, that kind of stuff, you tend to get a lot more kind of families or adult groups and things like that. So I think for the youth programs, or even for a lot of the adult programs, it's just kind of self-sufficiency. A lot of people that haven't
Mm,
really ever done anything in the outdoors, they really spend most of their time in cities. You don't really have to rely on yourself for a lot of things, which in some ways is nice, but in other ways also means people kind of feel like there's something missing a little bit confidence wise.
mm,
So being in the backcountry and knowing like you're responsible for your navigation and carrying all of your own food and your own gear and figuring out, where to set up camp, how to hang your food so the bears don't eat it, how to not end up survival spooning your tent mate. It just really fosters a good sense of kind of self-confidence, and people can really take that into everything, just knowing that you can deal with adversity and overcome it.
mm. Yeah, I just guided a small group of people like a month ago. And one of the things that they talked about on trail was how it kind of shifted their perspective of carrying everything they needed to survive on their backs. And that was really cool to hear because I guess I do it regularly and I don't always think about it. I'm like, of course, because that's what you need. But when you move into a space that is pretty extreme, like any sort of mountainous area where you're further away from the rest of civilization, you have to be okay with having less. And I think that I've seen that come through with people of just realizing that they don't need as much as they do at home. They don't need as much to survive out in the wilderness, and they don't want as much because you have to carry it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
right on. Yeah, and the confidence is a huge part of my personal experience and what I've seen. I brought another lady backpacking last weekend on her very first backpacking trip ever. And I this maybe is like my little misadventure recently. I had not scouted the trail ahead of time because it was kind of a last minute planning and she needed to be back by a certain time. And it was very steep, further, like probably a mile and a half further than charted. And the last mile and a half was all over like super steep shale, like knife edge kind of stuff. And parts of the trail had like slid away. And we made it. It was okay, but it was definitely this like eye-opening experience of when she walked in, she was really scared. She was able to, well, scared is maybe an exaggeration. She was nervous about it, but she was able to overcome that. And on the way out, she was really like felt a lot more confidence in herself and expressed that. And then just like days later, she shared a story with me, kind of a write up and post about her experience. And like the confidence had just like kept going even after she got back. And it was really cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one thing I do really love about guiding is just seeing people experience all of this for the first time because I grew up doing it. I do it all the time.
Hmm.
So, it's just really great to see it kind of from new eyes every time.
Absolutely. And I learned a lot. I've learned a lot every time I've backpacked this summer. And that's something that I think is true pretty much every time I go, even if I've been doing it most of my life. I always learn something new. Next, Kristin is going to share with us some of her experience of how outdoor experience has influenced her writing style as an author and writing our stories, telling our stories, and how to rewrite them. So, Kristin, tell us about the writing side of your life. That was one of the things I was like, oh, okay, Kristin's an expert in so many things. What do I want to think about? And I was
I have so
thinking
many
about
random hobbies.
you do. But I think writing is probably one of your biggest passions if I were to just put that out there as somebody who's known
Yeah,
you
it's
for a
also been my
while.
main source of employment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sometimes challenging because you're like it changes your relationship to that passion a little bit, but I wanted to hear about the writing side because I'm sure that your experience outdoors has influenced your writing. I know it's been a big part of the writing that you've had published. Um, and you might have some insights into how we tell our personal stories and like both from a writing side and just kind of finding that story within ourselves, and also the idea of how knowing what our story is and having told it, we're then able to make changes to it and edits, right? And shift it towards
Definitely.
something that we actually want our stories to look like.
Yeah, I guess for writing, I guess, I mean, I always liked reading. I've not always, like, I always liked writing um, from when I was a kid. So I just wrote a lot. And I didn't really plan to be a writer as a career just because it's really hard to do. And there aren't that many full-time writing positions, and freelancing can be pretty terrible and very, very kind of spotty employment-wise. But it ended up, I published some freelance work a little bit in local magazines in late middle school and early high school. And then at the end of high school, I got my first national piece published, which I actually wrote while staring at the mountains and not paying attention in English class. So that paid off great. And then the river guiding company I'd been working for, I started writing their blogs and doing all their web content, and ended up handling basically all the content on the website, and kind of jumped off that. And actually, my first job after college was I was the destinations department editor for Backpacker magazine, and I did that for about 2.5 years. It was really interesting. I learned a lot. Got to combine the outdoors and writing. Definitely had its ups and downs. And since then, well, I do still work as a writer, and I'm more in the climate science area. And other than that, I just write things for fun on the side as well, all fiction and things.
Yeah. Well, so with your time with Backpacker, I know that you got to write some, but you also read a lot, and you talked about how some of it was really terrible and some of it was decent. But it was all of
Yes.
these people, like, what were people writing about? Like, what was it the hike? Like, was it like a review, or was it some sort of kind of poetic experience as seen through their eyes from
Generally,
the
it was really
perspective?
like a transformative experience or something that was like a trip that was really important to them for a variety of reasons. We did have some more kind of like hike reviews or just, oh, I went and hiked this trail. It was very cool. You should read about it.
Mm-hmm.
But we also had a lot that were more transformative experiences.
Yeah.
So you definitely saw that common thread of going into the wilderness and figuring things out or figuring out how you wanted to shape your life going forward. And a lot of times having decided to go into the wilderness because you wanted to change something and you needed to figure it out.
Yeah, it's interesting that people are like, oh, I need to change my life, so I'm gonna go put my life at risk in the woods. But the
Yeah,
thing is, like,
I
it
think
does open it up for transformative
there's
experience.
there's some good ways to do it and some not as good ways to do it. And there's a fair amount of articles I've read and some books, and I won't name any particular names, but many of them are very popular. And those people, I'm glad they had a safe trans in the end transformative experience, but like that was not the way to tackle it, and they are very lucky to be
Mm,
alive. And you also get issues off of that where a bunch of people read those books and they decide to go do that, and then a bunch of them die or search and rescue is sent out for them, which puts all of those people's lives at risk. So I
hmm.
think definitely there's a lot to be said for going into the wilderness to have a transformative experience. I think if you're really inexperienced, there's also a lot to be said for hiring a guide.
Absolutely. I think for people who I want to jump back to your frozen snuggling story. Like, for people going out, at that point you had plenty of experience, but you found yourself in a situation where it was your first time doing something, your first time with winter camping. And
Mhm.
I can imagine that having somebody who had done it before would have made some smarter calls, or at least if you had gone through with it, like maybe been more prepared with additional gear or emergency gear.
Yeah. If I was going on that trip today as the more experienced person, and one of the other people was like, my sleeping bag got lost on the way up here, and we were 20 minutes out of town, I would say, well, let's come back next weekend.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I think the safety thing is huge. And you're right in that a lot of like media portrayal of those transformative experiences in the outdoors doesn't factor that in. Yeah. So how, okay, so you've read a bunch of transformative experiences. Have you written any like stories about your experience, like any transformative experiences that you've had? Or
I read a lot of stories. I wrote articles for Backpacker, and I've done some for a few other publications as well. Don't know if I've done any that would say it was like a single transformative experience. I guess for me, like a lot of times while I'm out there, I figure something out, or even if I don't, I still have a lot of fun. I think a lot of it has been just knowing that I can do what needs to be done when, when things go wrong, or even if they don't go wrong and you've just decided to go do something difficult for no particular reason.
Mhm.
And yeah, I can't think of any specific ones. Yeah, I written about skipping school to go skiing. I wouldn't say that was transformative, but it was fun.
Yeah. So I was thinking about Mary Oliver and how so much of her writing, well, pretty much all of her poetry is about nature and the outdoors. And that influenced probably the like I don't know if this is the right word, mouthfeel of her poetry. So do you feel like I mean, well, do you do a lot of writing outdoors versus like in coffee shops or at home?
I mean, I always have a notebook with me. Um, I wouldn't say I've done any lengthy writing outdoors just because there tend to be bugs and cold. And usually there's something interesting I want to go do, but I am always carrying a notebook with me. And a lot of stuff I do hang out in coffee shops and write, hang out anywhere and write is about the outdoors. I mean, sometimes it is literally just an article about something I went and did outdoors, or a poem about a place I went, or something I did. And even in fiction, I think it's just such a huge part of my life. It just comes in anyway with how I describe things and where people are. All the characters are constantly wandering around in the woods and mountains, and it's kind of part for all of tends to be for all of my characters as well. Like wilderness tends to be kind of key. And so I think it just comes through kind of no matter what I'm writing, just because it is so central to
Hmm.
my life.
Yeah. I feel like I'm curious to know if the characters that you write about in your fiction works also have transformative experience outdoors.
Well, usually they've been caught up in some sort of war or something unpleasant, so they've got a lot going on. But it does tend to be like where they feel at home and
Mm,
where kind of they go to figure things out or to take a break. Um, so I don't think I have anybody who goes into the wilderness and has a transformative experience just centered around wilderness and comes back out and is like, I figured everything out. We're good to go now.
yeah.
Um,
I appreciate that a lot because I think it makes it more accessible. Like both your characters are more accessible for that reason, and the idea of experiencing the outdoors is more accessible because you're like, yes, we go on long backpacking trips, and a lot of people have transformative experiences in the woods, but it's also like a refuge in a lot of ways.
yeah, I feel like, in a lot of the more mainstream portrayals of it, it doesn't really address the fact that, like, yeah, you might have a realization in the wilderness or figure some things out, but you have to bring that back to your regular life and keep doing it. It is a great place to go to have fun or to figure things out, but you can't just you can't just run away.
Mm-hmm.
Really, you have to you bring it back with you, like what you learned and what you experienced, and you bring that back into your life. Uh it isn't just an escape.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's kind of where, like, the bringing it back into your life is where you are able to start rewriting your story, right? So
Yeah,
if like one, it helps to know yourself. We require self-awareness in order to make change. And going out into the woods often opens that up for us just mentally. Like we can sit, if you can sit in the woods, you're sitting with yourself. And you like eventually will get to know yourself better and better, even if that's the only thing you do. But that bringing it home is where you actually start to make the changes and do the edits. So,
definitely. Yeah, and at least, when you're out there, you're not being bombarded by any ads or anyone telling you like what they think you should do, and you have a bit more time to figure it out. I know I've done that a bit going to the mountains this year and
mhm,
questioning like, do I want to kind of continue the path I've chosen to go on career-wise, and deciding if that's insane or not. And it's not what I really want. And I think that's a good place to go to kind of get away from the noise for a little bit and figure it out. But then you got to come back and be like, okay, I picked it. That's what I want to do.
mhm,
Like, what are my next steps back here, not in the woods?
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the noise is something that I've been hearing a lot about from Jack because one of my questions for him was he talks about the city as having like a lot of psychic noise, and so he isn't able to just be like, whereas in the woods he'll just like sit and tend to fire and just like be himself and not think about like overthink or think about all these things or be bombarded with all of this. And um sorry, I got distracted. Bombarded with all of this, and then he comes back and it hits him again. And I was like, well, how is it that we can help to bring in that sense of like peace and calm and agency when we come back to town when
Mhm.
we're bombarded by all of it again? I think just being like, I picked this, and having that understanding of commitment is an important part of that. And I think the experience of going out and having that self confidence and the ability to do something really challenging and overcome something really challenging also feeds into the ability to stick to your commitment.
Definitely. Yeah, let you kind of have some time to figure out a bit more like who you are and what you want. And then, but yeah, you still got to be able to stick to that when you come back. You say, okay, I figured it out. So this is what I'm going to do to continue to channel that in back in town.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any tips for people that like anything that you've found to be effective?
I mean, I think a big one is just it's going to be a lot of hard work, whatever you choose to do. That's, that's your path. And like you might have an epiphany about it one day in the woods, but you're still going to have to put in all the work to get it done. And sometimes it's going to kind of be a slog and you might question all
Hmm.
of your life choices. But, then it's worth it when you have the moments where you've gotten there or just kind of along the journey where you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, or at least something that you enjoy doing that will provide you with maybe the free time or the money to go do the things that you like to go do for fun.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I would say like don't underestimate how much work you're going to have to put in. It will not all feel like an epiphany. Some of it
Absolutely.
will just feel like a slog.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I think my add-on to that would be it's a lot of work, and the way to conquer that amount of work is little tiny steps at a time, like chip away at it. And
Yeah.
also to find a balance between the amount of work and your due play. Like you deserve to get to enjoy yourself sometimes. And if
Yeah,
you
like
have
definitely
too much
still
of
do
one or too
things that
much of
you
the other,
enjoy. Yeah.
things don't move forward. So,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Well, we should wrap up here. Any last things that you would like to share in terms of advice or funny stories before I tell people more about where to find your work?
Um, Always carry a rain jacket and test that your rain jacket and rain boots are in fact waterproof before you leave for a month-long trip.
Oh, I feel like that's something you should do before you leave for any trip, but absolutely a
Yes.
month-long one.
Uh-huh. It just happened to me on a longer trip.
Yeah. Well, I am guessing, well, you're here. You did not like get hypothermia. You maybe got trench foot. Who knows?
No, I didn't get trench foot.
That's
I
good.
could dress boots out on the weekends. I did get headbutted by a sheep, but I don't think that was related to the wet boots.
You got hit by a sheep?
Yeah, it
This
was like
would
just a
totally
little,
happen to you.
just a little one. It headbutted me in the knees. It left everyone else alone, so I was kind of offended.
Hmm. You
I
know,
felt very
you
singled out.
do have like a special way with animals.
Yeah, I should probably just avoid most of them.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, that was hilarious, and I love ending on that. So, if you guys want to learn more about Kristin, read more of her work, you can find Kristin's articles, journals, etc. at seekingthewildedge.blogspot.com and the Backpacker website if you sort by author name. And any other, like, do you have an Instagram, anything like that that you'd want to share?
I do have an Instagram that I had while I was a backpacker. That was more of a professional one, but really nothing gets put on there anymore. So I can't say I really recommend following it.
All right. Okay. Well, Kristin, thanks for hanging out and chatting. And I always have a great time. And usually there's some really absurd story that comes up, like you getting headbutted by a sheep.
I'm glad I can continue to provide the absurd.
Yes. Well, since you're an expert in so many things, I'm sure that I will have you back and we'll focus on something else, and you'll probably have some new absurd story, and it'll be fantastic.
Sounds great. I look forward to it.
All right.